If this isn't the first time you're watching one of my videos, you might have realized that I like the Souls games a little bit. And back when Elden Ring was nothing but a distant dream, I remember finding a game that seamlessly united two of the things that left the most questionable impact on my outlook on life. Those being, of course, anime and Dark Souls. Let me preface this by saying that this game is not a masterpiece, not by a long shot. It is the gaming equivalent of a Big Mac, hardly something you'd consider the epitome of gastronomic experiences, and yet with the proper state of mind it can be one of the best meals of your life. Let's look back at Cold Vein and how a certain mentality can make this okay experience become an honorary 10 out of 10. As you've already inferred from the introduction, this game is objectively mid. In previous points in time I had played games that did something Cold Vein did but better. However, none of them ever let me play as my Oshis. But that's not the reason why I liked it back when I first played it in 2020, because the concept of funny anime people being silly on the internet had never even crossed my mind, much less become a crippling addiction. I'm here to hopefully explain how and why behind all this jank there is something genuinely worth experiencing. You play as a Revenant, which for the sake of simplicity is basically a vampire that can go in the sunlight. Revenants have this quirky ability to come back to life after death with the simple trade-off of losing part of your memories and surviving on the consumption of human blood and the nectar of the cum tree. The game begins during a period of extreme drought, and the survivors have resorted to drastic measures to find more blood to sustain themselves. You're tasked with finding more of the magic blood trees and fending off what became of those who failed at that task. That's the setup. It's an interesting premise, but definitely not the most out there thing I've ever seen. From Software easily goes more surreal than that on a daily basis. I'm not going to spoil the story too much, though I will be showing some mid-game locations. Don't worry, even if you see them, they won't make sense. I did say that the story was passable, but the lore does go to some interesting places in case you're curious. It's not the most amazing thing I've ever seen, but it was interesting enough that I bothered looking up the lore after finishing the story. Though it alone is not enough to carry the game for me, in fact nothing alone is enough to carry the game for me, the conjunction of everything is what makes this barely cohesive mess somehow really fun to play. And I have no idea why. To be honest, I did have a hard time coming up with arguments as to why I'd recommend this game, and that's something I'll justify in a later part of the video, but I've put together a few compelling ones. As I said, this game is mid. If you play it expecting a revolutionary experience, you'll be sorely disappointed. But if you're looking for a fun time, trust me, you will like this. Let's approach this systematically, beginning with the core element of any Souls-like, the combat. The combat in Cold Vein is janky, not enough that it becomes unplayable. In fact, it's significantly less clunky than the earlier games in the Souls series, and is polished enough that there are no occurrences of quote-unquote unfair damage. Clunky as it may be, it is possible to beat the hardest bosses in the game without taking a single hit. I did it. Twice. It took me 3 weeks. My problem with the combat comes specifically from the enemies. The majority of them have horrendous telegraphs in their animations, and their attacks are snappier than Margit's. If you don't know the attack patterns very well, relying on reaction time alone will not be enough to carry you most of the time. Is it possible? Yes, but only in the conjunction with good knowledge of the attack patterns. But even with these caveats, the combat can go really hard sometimes, and putting together a build that one-shots most of the things in the game is comparatively easy and significantly more overpowered than any of the other Souls-likes. You become less of a glass cannon and more of a crystal nuke, just make sure to not miss the attack. Since we're on the topic of builds, Cold Vein takes a different approach to leveling. The souls, I don't actually know if that's what they're called, are exclusively used for trading and increasing your health. Every single one of these attributes, like your dexterity and willpower, are controlled by blood codes. They're unlocked by finding these weird rocks throughout the game, and they alter your stats and weight capacity. Depending on which of the 5 weapon types you want to use, how mobile you want to be, or even what type of magic you want to use, you select a blood code that best suits whatever build you're thinking of. In my opinion, this is one of the things that Cold Vein does better than the other Souls-likes, because you can seamlessly alternate between whichever playstyle you want at whatever point of the game you want, without having to respec or doing something equivalently contrived. This is something I really like, because there will never come a point in the game where your build is the reason why you're struggling with a certain part, because you technically have access to every build. I mean, you still need to upgrade your weapons and attire, but it's a lot easier. Another thing this game does really well is how they manage skill usage. Other Souls games like to give you a resource limitation, either in the form of a mana bar or on a limit on how many times you can cast your spells per bonfire rest. In Cold Vein, all of your skills and spells cost a specific amount of Ichor, which is a resource you can get by simply hitting the enemies. I'm not sure if this approach is necessarily more balanced than the other games, but it felt a lot more fun to know that I could use my cool abilities whenever I wanted instead of having to save it for a particularly difficult encounter. And speaking of abilities, this game has a very elegant solution to letting you have a ton of abilities that are very easy to cycle through even if you have a controller. In PC games, using a certain skill typically is as simple as moving your finger a bit up and hitting the number keys, but a lot of the times in console games you are aggressively mashing the arrow keys until you get what you want. In Cold Vein, it is as easy as holding down a button that remaps your controller. Buttons that were previously mapped for interacting or using items seamlessly turn into skill prompts, and I just found that to be such a simple, easy and elegant feature. I have no idea how common this is on console games, but this is the first time I saw something like this, and I found it revolutionary. While this is a very console-exclusive problem, from 2017 to 2022 I've had laptops that could run maybe 2 separate Word documents before overheating, so the bulk of my experience with the newer games were from consoles. My point is that this game is so mid throughout its extension, yet every now and then you get glimpses of strokes of genius by the devs. Things that are so good and work so well you can't help but wonder why other games of this genre haven't also implemented them. They are little diamonds in the rough, and since I was playing this game without too high expectations, I was very pleasantly surprised to find things like these. But as Newton said, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and the only thing comparable to the brilliance of the mechanics I've explained is the profound stupidity and inexperience when it came to designing the maps. The area you're seeing in the background footage is called the Cathedral of the Sacred Blood, and it's notorious for being comically disorienting. I genuinely think it would be easier to navigate through the back rooms while tripping on 40 Benadryls, and yes, this is considering that you have a minimap that shows you where you've been before. The first time I played, I was stuck here for maybe 5 hours trying to find out where I was supposed to go, and I ended up just resorting to a YouTube video to show me the way. I could forgive and maybe even applaud this type of experience if this area was meant to be confusing, maybe if it was set on a maze or something, but there is no in-game reason as to why the cathedral is so contrived. It isn't labyrinthian by design, but by accident, and it shows in the batshit insane architecture. In fact, I think this is a problem with most of the areas in the game. They are typically desolate and ruined, and I don't think I found any of them to be particularly pretty. They are messy most of the time, and I feel like there hasn't been a lot of thought put into them, both aesthetically and thematically speaking. None of the areas feel particularly distinctive or memorable enough to stand out on their own, except for the cathedral because of how bad it is. And none of them are connected in any interesting or peculiar ways like we're used to seeing on FromSoft games, but either they're connected through these long underground concrete tunnels or through the use of the most nonsensical architecture you can conceive of. But even so, despite all the things this game does horribly, it's undeniable that there is something good to find in here. I wouldn't have spent almost 300 hours of my life playing it if I wasn't having fun. This brings me to the core topic of this video, more than halfway past its runtime. Cold Vein has a few good things about it, but it also has some very blatant issues that a lot of people would consider to be highly destructive to the experience. I genuinely don't know how to defend this game against these concrete, valid criticisms, but I still like it. I loved it, in fact. I had a very good time playing it, and that is not going to change. To me, there are two ways to consume media, be it passive media like movies or interactive media like games. Those are, respectively, paying attention and not paying attention. I swear, there have been numerous times when I finished watching or playing something that I really enjoyed and left with a pretty good opinion, only to go online and look at people talking shit about it, and then promptly having my opinion change for the worse. This phenomena is extremely common to me, but every time I catch myself falling for it, it pisses me off and just makes me defend the thing I liked initially with even more stubbornness. And even more common are the times when I get recommended or peer pressured into consuming some media that has been very highly acclaimed, only to be sorely underwhelmed by the end of the experience, thinking that it was just kinda mid. In the end, my opinion on the media I watched for my entertainment was more important than other people's opinions. Who would have thought? Some of you will call this attitude stupid, others will call it based, and others will say it's a way to justify bigotry. But guess what? You are all correct. To me, it's just my way of enjoying things that entertain me. That's not to say you should completely disregard other people's opinions on the media you liked, but you shouldn't let other people's tangential life experiences define whether or not you have the right to enjoy something. They are just seasoning, not the main course. There are media that are created with a very careful attention to detail, and will reward the people who are being very meticulous and observant with how they consume it. Stuff you can rewatch or replay multiple times, and every time you do so, you notice a new detail or discover something new. Those are amazing on their own, but there's also the type of media that will give you the maximized enjoyment if you just watch it while leaning back on the couch and not reading too deep into it. This whole tangent is to say that Cold Vein as an experience will give you a very good time provided you don't go digging for imperfections. So much media becomes immediately more enjoyable if you just consume it without paying too much attention. They aren't objectively better than the very meticulously crafted pieces of media, much on the contrary, but that's why I chose the word enjoyable instead of better. So many things become enjoyable when taken at face value. This game opened my eyes to try things I skipped out on due to external opinions despite my initial good impression of it. Granted, the majority of those things were actually pretty dog water, but still, there were a few diamonds in the rough, things that were not perfect, but I'm glad that I experienced them. Isn't that the point? Isn't the point of media to entertain and to bring fun to the people experiencing it? It doesn't matter if someone else thinks it's bad, if it brought joy and entertainment to you, that is the most important thing. Blah blah blah, look at me, I have different opinions, I am special. No, that's not my point. My point is that if you did or are going to do something for your own enjoyment, provided that it doesn't negatively impact other people, their opinion shouldn't matter nearly as much as your own. It doesn't matter if you like a piece of media or content that other people think it's bad. What matters is that it brought enjoyment to you when you experienced it, and posterior or external experiences shouldn't retroactively ruin that for you. Enjoy bad stuff because it's fun, dislike good stuff because it didn't click with you. It ultimately comes down to whether you had a good time with it. Don't let other people take away from that. So I didn't actually write a bit for the end of the video, so I'm just going to do the same thing I do in every single other one, and abruptly cut to the end screen just as I'm about to finish the punchline.